Today we will be demonstrating how to create a bar graph using Microsoft Excel. To do this, I will use the sample data set over here and compare the amount of time spent on different social media platforms. So bar graphs are used to compare two categories of groups. My groups or categories are hours on Instagram and hours on Facebook. And I measured these numbers from 8 different students. This is my sample. The first thing I need to do when creating a bar graph is calculate my averages. This is different than a scatter plot where I would simply use my raw data. For a bar graph, I need to graph my average. So in order to calculate my average, I'm going to use an Excel function. To do that, you always start with an equal sign. Then I'm interested in finding the average of my hours on Instagram for my 8 students. So I'm going to type the word average. I'm going to enter a parenthesis, and I have this little function pop up underneath my cell here. This tells me what I need to include in order to calculate my average. It's telling me I need to include all of the numbers to get my average. So to do that, in one motion, I'm going to highlight all of the hours on Instagram for my 8 students. So I'm going to click and drag until all 8 numbers are highlighted. I'll close out my parenthesis and hit enter. I'm going to show that one more time for my hours on Facebook. I'm going to start with my Excel function equal sign, type the word average, add a parenthesis, then highlight all 8 numbers for hours on Facebook. I hit enter and I get my average calculated for these 8 students, and I have my hours on Instagram calculated for those same 8 students. Next step is I'm going to transfer these 2 numbers over to my analysis table over here. The analysis table is helpful for using bar graphs because it automatically puts these 2 names on each of my columns with my corresponding average. So I'm simply going to type over my average for hours on Instagram, which happens to be 3.5. And then I'm going to type in the hours on Facebook average, which is 2.34. Next week, we will be going over how to calculate our standard error. But for this week, we're simply going to graph our bars. So in order to get your column graph or bar graph, you'll highlight these first 6 cells. So this blank one here, my hours on Instagram, my hours on Facebook, the average for hours on Instagram, and the average for hours on Facebook. I'll go to the upper left-hand corner and click Insert. Then tab over to the Recommended Charts area, where I will select the first column graph. Now I get this beautiful chart popped up on my screen. But I want to double check that my graph is correct. So I have 2 categories and 2 bars. The hours on Instagram bar has an average of 3.5, which matches my analysis table. The hours on Facebook bar has an average of between 2 and 2.5, which matches my analysis table as well. So the last thing I need to do to make my bar graph complete is add my y-axis label. I already have x-axis labels for my 2 columns, hours on Instagram and hours on Facebook. So I need to add a label for my y. To do that, I'm going to go over to this add chart element, scroll down to axis titles, and add my primary vertical. This is the same exact way that you add axis titles for scatter plots. And here, I'm going to use my label. So because I graphed the average hours, my y-axis label must include average. And for this case, it's average hours. The last thing I need to do on my bar graph is to add a title. So I'm going to simply add the title of what I am comparing. Since I am comparing two different social media platforms and the amount of time spent, I'm going to use that as my title. I'm going to make sure everything is spelled correctly. I have proper capitalization when I need to. Make sure it sounds okay. Comparison of amount of time spent on social media platforms. Once I complete this, my bar chart is done.